My son, the boy I raised with every ounce of my soul, slapped me his own mother when I dared to protect my home from his greedy fiancé. That blow didn't just bruise my face, it ripped my heart to shreds, crushing every memory of the child I cherished. How could he do this to me? Stay with me. This is my battle for justice. I'm Margaret, a 8-year-old widow, living in my Asheville home, a 1,500 square foot haven where every corner holds a piece of my heart. This is where I raised Daniel, my only son, through muddy Little League games and late-night math tears. His laughter once echoed off the oak floors George, my late husband, laid with his own hands. After George passed, this house became my anchor, its peonies blooming each spring, like a promise kept. But when Daniel's tech startup crashed last year, he came back, duffel bag in hand, eyes heavy with defeat. "Mom, I just need a place to land," he said, voice soft like the boy I'd bandaged after falls. I opened my door, cooked his favorite meatloaf, thinking he needed me again. Then Sophie arrived, his fiancée, all smiles and polished nails, her voice dripping with charm. "This house is so quaint, Margaret. So much potential," she said, eyeing my dining room table like it was already hers. At first, I believed her warmth, thought her compliments were kind, but I caught her measuring my living room curtains one evening, whispering to Daniel about modernizing. He nodded, then turned to me, casual as rain. "Mom, you're getting older. Let me handle the bills, save you the stress." His words sounded sweet, but there was a glint in his eyes, sharp like a knife's edge. I handed over the checkbook, trusting him. That was my first mistake. And it wouldn't be my last. The air in my Asheville home grew heavier each day, as if the walls themselves sensed the shift. Daniel, my son, had settled into a routine, his footsteps heavier now, less like the boy who'd raced through these halls and more like a man with a plan. Sophie, his fiancée, flitted through my 1,500 square foot house like she was already picking out paint swatches for the walls. I'd catch her in the living room, her phone raised, snapping photos of George's old oak bookshelf. "This could be a great accent piece once we update it," she'd say to Daniel, her voice bright but sharp, like a blade hidden in silk. I smiled, nodded, and kept my thoughts locked away, but my trust was unraveling, thread by thread. It started small. One morning, over coffee in my kitchen, Daniel slid a stack of papers across the table. "Mom, these are just routine updates for your accounts," he said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "Online banking's tricky. I've set up a joint account to make things easier." I hesitated, my fingers brushing the edge of the papers. "I've managed fine for years, Daniel," I said, my voice steady but soft. He chuckled, dismissive. "Come on, Mom. You don't need the stress. I've got this." His tone was warm, but it carried an edge, like he was daring me to argue. I signed, not because I trusted him fully, but because I wanted to believe the boy I raised still had my heart in mind. That was my second mistake. Days later, I noticed the mail stopped coming to the house. Bills, bank statements, even my AARP magazine, they vanished. When I asked Daniel, he shrugged, leaning against the counter. "I had it rerouted to a P.O. box, Mom. Safer that way." Safer for who, I wondered, but I didn't press. Instead, I started checking my bank app late at night, when the house was quiet. Small withdrawals appeared, $50 here, $200 there, labeled family expenses. I hadn't approved them. My heart sank, not from the money, but from the realization that Daniel wasn't just helping, he was taking. Sophie's presence grew bolder. One afternoon, I found her in my dining room with a friend, a young woman in high-waisted jeans, measuring the space between my windows. "This room could be stunning with a modern chandelier," Sophie said, her voice carrying a confidence that didn't belong here. "Margaret's style is sweet, but it's dated." I stood in the doorway, unnoticed, my hands tightening around my gardening gloves. Dated. That word stung, not because it was true, but because it dismissed the life George and I built: the Sunday dinners, the Christmas mornings, the laughter soaked into these walls. I said nothing, just slipped back to my peonies, but I started a journal that night. In George's old tackle box, hidden under fishing lures, I wrote, the 15th of March. Sophie measured dining room, called my style dated. Daniel rerouted mail. The final straw came one evening in April. I was washing dishes when I overheard Sophie on her phone, her voice low but clear through the open window. "It's practically ours, babe," she said, laughing softly. "She's too old to fight us on this. We'll have the deed by summer." My hands froze in the soapy water, the sponge slipping from my fingers. I looked out at my garden, the peonies catching the last light of day, and felt a fire ignite in my chest. Not anger, not yet, but a clarity, sharp and unyielding. They weren't just living in my home. They were planning to steal it. I didn't confront them. Instead, I drove 10 miles to the Asheville Library the next morning, my hands steady on the wheel of my old Buick. There, in a quiet corner, I searched public records on a computer that hummed like it was as old as me. I found the deed to my house, the one George and I signed in 1985, buried in digital archives. My eyes caught a clause, written in his careful handwriting. No transfer of ownership, without mutual consent of both original owners or their legal successors. George, my cautious, stubborn George, had built a wall around our home, even from the grave. I printed the page, tucked it into my purse, and felt my pulse quicken. This wasn't over. They thought they had me cornered, but I was just beginning to see the board. The weight of betrayal settled over my Asheville home like a fog, creeping into every corner of my 1,500-square-foot sanctuary. Each day, Daniel and Sophie carved out more of my world, leaving me a stranger in the place where I'd raised my son and loved my George. I'd always thought of my home as a living thing, its oak floors holding the echoes of our laughter, its peonies blooming as proof of our resilience. But now it felt like a museum, and I was the forgotten exhibit, fading under Daniel's indifference and Sophie's calculated charm. It began with small slights, each one a needle in my heart. Dinners, once a time for stories and warmth, stopped including me. I'd come downstairs to find Daniel and Sophie at the dining room table, plates piled with takeout from the barbecue joint 3 miles down the road, their laughter filling the air. "Oh, Mom, we didn't think you'd want any," Daniel said one evening, barely glancing up from his phone. Sophie offered a tight smile, her fork pausing midair. "You're always so busy with your garden?" she added, her voice sweet but hollow like a candy shell with nothing inside. I nodded, retreating to my room with a cold sandwich, the door clicking shut behind me. Alone, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the framed photo of Daniel at his 5th birthday, his gap-toothed grin bright under a paper crown. Had I imagined that boy, the one who'd clung to me during thunderstorms, promising, "I'll always take care of you, Mom"? Sophie's presence grew more invasive, like ivy choking my peonies. One Saturday, I found her in my bedroom, holding up my lace curtains handmade by George's mother against the window. "These are so old-fashioned," she said to a friend on speakerphone, her voice dripping with disdain. "We'll replace them with something sleek, maybe linen." I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart pounding. Those curtains had hung there for 30 years, catching the morning light as George and I sipped coffee together. "Sophie," I said, my voice sharper than I intended, "those aren't yours to change." She turned, startled, then laughed lightly. "Oh, Margaret, I'm just planning ahead. You'll thank me when this place feels fresh." Her friend giggled through the phone, and I felt my cheeks burn, not with anger, but with shame, like I was the intruder in my own life. The isolation deepened. My friends from the Asheville Garden Club stopped calling, assuming I was too busy with Daniel and Sophie. My mailbox, now redirected to their P.O. box, sat empty. One evening, I found a stack of my bank statements on the kitchen counter, opened, with Daniel's handwriting scrawled across them notes about consolidating funds. I confronted him, my voice trembling but firm. Daniel, these are my accounts. Why are you opening my mail? He leaned back in his chair, casual, almost bored. Mom, relax. I'm just keeping things organized. You don't need to worry about this stuff anymore. His dismissal hit harder than any slap could. I wasn't his mother in that moment. Just an obstacle, a relic to be managed. The lowest moment came one quiet May evening. I sat in my garden, the peonies drooping under a late spring rain, their petals scattered like broken promises. I remembered Daniel at 10, kneeling beside me, his small hands digging in the dirt. Mom, will these flowers live forever? He'd asked, his eyes wide with wonder. I'd laughed, ruffling his hair. Nothing lives forever, but we keep them alive with care. Now, as I stared at those same flowers, I felt a hollow ache, deeper than grief. Had I failed him? Or had he failed me? I was becoming a ghost in my own home, unseen, unheard, my life erased one curtain, one bank statement, one dinner at a time. I clutched my journal, its pages heavy with dates and details, and whispered to the peonies, I'm still here. But something shifted that night. As I tucked my journal back into George's tackle box, I caught sight of the deed printout, its words a lifeline from my husband's foresight. I wasn't just a widow clinging to memories. I was Margaret, who'd built this home with love and sweat, who'd buried George under these peonies and kept them blooming. They thought I was fading, but I wasn't done. Not yet. The June sun hung low over my Asheville garden, casting long shadows across the peonies that had witnessed my quiet unraveling. I knelt in the dirt, my hands cradling a wilting bloom, when Daniel's voice cut through the stillness. Mom, we need to talk, he said, his tone clipped, like a man who'd already made up his mind. Sophie stood behind him, arms crossed, her polished nails glinting like tiny warnings. I stood slowly, brushing soil from my knees, my heart steady but alert. The air felt charged, as if the 1,500-square-foot house behind us knew a storm was brewing. Daniel didn't waste time. You need to sign over the house, he said, his eyes fixed on me, unblinking. Sophie's starting a business, and this place is perfect for her studio. You don't need all this space anymore. His words landed like stones, each one heavier than the last. I glanced at Sophie, her face calm, almost expectant, as if my home was already hers. This house is my life with George, I said, my voice low but firm. I'm not signing anything. Daniel's jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists. Mom, be reasonable. You're 68. You can't keep up with a house this size. We're trying to help you. Help me? I repeated, my voice rising despite myself. By taking the home I built? The place where I raised you? Sophie stepped forward, her voice smooth as glass. Margaret, it's not about taking. It's about planning for the future, our future. Her words dripped with false sweetness, but her eyes were cold, calculating, like she was measuring me for a coffin. I shook my head, the peonies trembling in the breeze. This isn't your future. It's mine. That's when it happened. Without warning, Daniel's hand swung, striking my cheek with a force that sent a hot, searing pain through my face. My knees buckled, but I caught myself on the garden trellis, the wood splintering under my grip. The world rang in my ears, a sharp, shameful hum. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I straightened, my hand steady, and looked him in the eyes. You just showed me who you are, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Daniel's face flushed, his breath heavy, but he didn't apologize. Sophie shifted, uncomfortable, her eyes darting away. Mom, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Daniel muttered, his voice faltering, like he knew he'd crossed a line but couldn't take it back. Harder? I said, stepping closer, my cheek still burning. You think this is hard for me? You raised your hand to your mother over a house. He flinched, but Sophie's silence was louder. her presence a cold weight in the garden. I turned away, my heart not breaking but hardening, like the soil beneath my peonies after too long without rain. I walked back to the house, my steps deliberate, the screen door creaking as I entered. In the quiet of my bedroom, I pulled out George's tackle box, my journal inside, its pages a record of their betrayal. But this time, I reached past it, to the folded deed printout I'd found at the library. I unfolded it, my fingers tracing George's handwritten clause. No transfer of ownership, without mutual consent, of both original owners or their legal successors. My husband, gone 5 years, had left me a shield. A tear slipped down my cheek, not for Daniel's slap, but for George, who'd known I'd need protection one day. I sat at my desk, the same one where I'd graded papers as a school teacher, and wrote a new entry. The 10th of June, Daniel demanded the deed, slapped me when I refused. Sophie watched, said nothing. My hand didn't shake. The pain in my cheek was nothing compared to the clarity in my chest. They thought they could bully me, erase me. But they'd misread me. I wasn't just a widow tending peonies. I was Margaret, who'd rebuilt this life after George's death, who'd kept this house standing through storms and sorrow. I tucked the deed back into the tackle box, my resolve hardening like concrete. They wanted my home, but they'd have to fight for it, and I was ready to fight back. The sting of Daniel's slap lingered on my cheek, but it was the fire in my chest that drove me now. My Asheville home was no longer just a sanctuary, it was a battleground. I'd spent weeks feeling like a ghost, watching Daniel and Sophie carve up my life like it was theirs to claim. But that June afternoon, as I clutched George's deed in my bedroom, I knew I wasn't fading. I was forging a plan. Quiet as the peonies that still bloomed despite their neglect. They thought I was weak, an old widow too tired to fight. They were wrong. The next morning, I drove my old Buick 12 miles to the Buncombe County Clerk's office. The deed printout tucked in my purse like a talisman. The clerk, a young man named Tom with wire-rimmed glasses, greeted me with a polite nod. "I need to confirm the status of my property," I said, my voice steady despite the pulse hammering in my throat. "It's been in my name since 1985. Tom tapped at his computer, then slid a document across the counter. "You're the sole owner, Mrs. Thompson," he said, pointing to the record. "No transfers, no liens. And this clause here," he tapped George's handwritten note, "means no one can change that without your signature." I traced the words with my finger, George's careful script a whisper from the past. "Thank you," I said, folding the paper carefully. As I left, I felt taller, as if George's strength had seeped into my bones. Back home, I didn't confront Daniel or Sophie. I played the part they expected: quiet, agreeable Margaret, tending her peonies. But every night, in the silence of my room, I added to my journal in George's tackle box. The 12th of June, Sophie posted a photo of my kitchen on Instagram, captioned, "Future remodel vibes." Daniel withdrew $300 from my account, labeled home maintenance. Each entry was a brick in the wall I was building, a record of their greed. I started checking my bank app more carefully, noticing new charges: a $500 consulting fee, a $1,200 payment to a contractor I'd never met. When I asked Daniel about it, he waved me off, leaning against the fridge. "Mom, it's just for repairs. You want the house to stay nice, don't you?" His smile was too easy, like a salesman closing a deal. I nodded, but my eyes caught Sophie's phone screen, open to a real estate app, my address typed in. I needed help. The next day, I slipped out to meet Ellen, a lawyer recommended by my old friend Betty from the Asheville Garden Club. Ellen's office was a small, cedar-scented room downtown, lined with law books and a single potted fern. I handed her my journal, the deed, and printouts of my bank statements, marked with Daniel's unauthorized withdrawals. "They're trying to take my home," I said, my voice low but fierce. He hit me when I refused. Ellen's eyes narrowed, flipping through my notes. Margaret, this is serious. Unauthorized transfers, manipulation, this could be elder abuse. She leaned forward, her pen tapping the desk. You've got a strong case. That deed clause is ironclad, and these bank records show a pattern. Do you want to move forward? I nodded, my hands steady. I want my home back. Ellen mapped out the steps. File an injunction to freeze the deed, flag the bank accounts, and gather more evidence. I drove to my bank that afternoon, a brick building 2 miles from home, and met with Linda, a teller I'd known since she worked the drive-thru. I need to secure my accounts, I told her, sliding my ID across the counter. Linda frowned, pulling up my records. Margaret, there's a joint account linked to Daniel. He's been moving funds $2,500 last month alone. My stomach twisted, but I kept my voice calm. Can you open a new account, just in my name? She nodded, her fingers flying over the keyboard. By the time I left, I'd moved $10,000 to a new account, safe from Daniel's reach. I didn't tell him. I didn't tell Sophie. I just smiled at dinner, passing the mashed potatoes like nothing had changed. That night, I found Sophie's latest Instagram post, a photo of my front porch captioned, "Can't wait to call this ours. Number dream home." My heart pounded, not with fear, but with resolve. I added it to my journal, along with a screenshot, and hid the tackle box under my bed. They thought they were winning, but I was building a case, piece by piece. The peonies outside my window stood tall, their petals catching the moonlight. I wasn't just fighting for my home, I was fighting for myself, and I was ready for the next move. The summer heat pressed against my Asheville home, but the fire inside me burned hotter. Daniel and Sophie thought they'd won, their plans for my home laid out in Instagram posts and whispered phone calls. But I'd built a fortress of evidence, my journal in George's tackle box a testament to their greed. With Ellen's help, I'd filed an injunction to freeze the deed, locking them out of any legal claim. Now, it was time to show them I wasn't the frail widow they'd underestimated. I planned it carefully, like tending my peonies through a drought. Ellen had the injunction papers served to Daniel, but I wanted more, a moment they couldn't ignore. My friend Betty, still sharp from her days running the Asheville Garden Club, had a cousin at the local news station, WNCN. Margaret, you want the world to see this? She asked over coffee at the diner 2 miles from my house. I nodded, my hands steady around my mug. They've walked over me long enough. Let's make it public. Betty made the call, and by Friday morning, a news van was parked discreetly across the street, ready to capture the reckoning. That afternoon, Sophie pulled up in a rented moving truck, its engine rumbling as it parked crookedly in my driveway. She stepped out, phone in hand, live streaming to her 5,000 followers, her voice bright with triumph. Guys, it's finally happening. Our new home, she chirped, panning the camera across my front porch. Her friends, a trio in designer sunglasses, unloaded boxes labeled studio and decor. I watched from the garden, hidden behind my peonies, my heart pounding but my resolve like steel. Taped to the front door was a laminated notice, drafted with Ellen's precision. This property is under legal injunction, filed with Buncombe County on the 15th of June. No items may be moved in or altered. Unauthorized entry is trespassing. Margaret Thompson, owner. Sophie reached the door, her smile faltering as she read the notice. Her phone dipped, the live stream catching her stunned expression. "What is this?" she muttered, her voice sharp with panic. Her friends crowded behind her, murmuring. That's when the news van rolled closer, its lights flicking on, a reporter stepping out with a microphone. I walked forward, my gardening gloves still on, the dirt under my nails a badge of my fight. The reporter, a young woman named Claire, nodded to me. "Mrs. Thompson, care to comment?" she asked, her camera trained on the scene. I faced Sophie, my voice calm but unyielding. "This is my home, Sophie. You're trespassing." Her eyes widened, her phone shaking in her hand. "Margaret, this is a mistake," Daniel said. She stammered, but I cut her off. "Daniel doesn't own this house. I do. And you both tried to steal it." The camera caught every word, Sophie's followers watching live as her face flushed red. Her friends backed away, clutching their boxes, one whispering, "I didn't sign up for this." Daniel appeared then, rushing out from the house, his shirt untucked, his face pale. "Mom, what the hell are you doing?" he snapped, his voice cracking. "This is on the news?" "It's the truth," I said, stepping closer, my eyes locked on his. "You slapped me, Daniel. You tried to take my home with lies and papers you had no right to sign. Now the world knows." The reporter stepped forward, her microphone steady. "Mr. Thompson, care to explain the allegations of financial manipulation?" Daniel froze, his mouth opening, then closing, like a fish caught on a hook. Sophie's livestream was still running, comments flooding in. "What's going on? Is this real?" Her victory unraveling in real time. I stood tall, the peonies behind me swaying in the breeze. "You thought I was too old to fight," I said, my voice carrying across the yard, clear enough for the camera. "But this house is my life. Built with George's hands and mine. You don't get to erase that." Sophie's phone fell to her side, her friends piling back into their cars, the moving truck's driver watching awkwardly. Daniel's shoulders slumped, his eyes darting to the news van, then back to me. "Mom, we can fix this," he said, his voice low, desperate. But I shook my head. "You broke it, Daniel. Now you face the consequences." As the news crew packed up, Claire handed me her card. "You're one tough lady, Mrs. Thompson," she said with a smile. I nodded, my heart steady but heavy. The fight wasn't over, but I'd drawn blood. Back inside, I opened my journal, adding, "The 17th of June, injunction served." Sophie's livestream exposed their plan. News crew captured it all. The peonies outside stood prouder now, their petals catching the fading light. I wasn't done yet. I had one more move to make. The dust settled on my Asheville home, but the echoes of that public confrontation lingered like a summer storm's aftershock. My 1,500-square-foot haven, with its oak floors and peonies, was mine again, not just in my heart, but in the eyes of the law. The news crew's lights had faded. Sophie's moving truck had rumbled away, and Daniel's desperate pleas had fallen silent. I stood on my front porch, the laminated injunction notice still taped to the door, its words a shield forged by George's foresight and my resolve. I'd fought back, not with screams or tears, but with the quiet strength of truth. Now it was time to reclaim what was mine, and ensure it would never be taken again. 2 days later, on the 19th of June, the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office sent Officer Reynolds, a broad-shouldered man with a kind but firm demeanor, to oversee Daniel and Sophie's eviction. I stood in the living room, my hands folded, as Daniel packed a duffel bag, his movements jerky, his eyes avoiding mine. Sophie hovered near the staircase, her phone silent for once, her face pale without its usual gloss. "Mrs. Thompson," Officer Reynolds said, his voice steady. "You're in full control now. They've got 1 hour to clear out." I nodded, my gaze fixed on the oak bookshelf George had built, its shelves still holding our old photo albums. Daniel paused, a shirt in his hand, and finally looked at me. "Mom, you didn't have to do this," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. "We could have worked it out." "Worked it out?" I said, my voice calm but sharp, like a blade honed by weeks of betrayal. "You slapped me, Daniel. You let Sophie parade through my home like I was already gone. You don't work that out." He flinched, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing. Sophie stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Margaret, I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her eyes darting to the officer. "We just wanted a fresh start." I looked at her, the girl who'd called my curtains dated, who'd posted my porch as her own. "A fresh start doesn't come at the cost of someone else's life," I said. This is my home, not your Instagram backdrop. She looked away, her hands twisting together, and followed Daniel out the door, their footsteps fading down the driveway. With them gone, the house felt lighter, as if it could breathe again. I walked through each room, my fingers trailing over the oak floors, the dining table where we'd celebrated Daniel's birthdays, the windows framed by George's mother's lace curtains. The silence wasn't empty, it was full, rich with memories I'd fought to protect. That evening, I sat down with Ellen, my lawyer, at the kitchen table, a pot of coffee brewing, its aroma grounding me. She slid a folder across the table, her eyes warm but professional. "The injunction's permanent," she said. "The deed is locked in your name, and the bank accounts are secure. But we need to talk about your will." I'd been thinking about that since the day I found George's deed clause. "I want to rewrite it," I said, my voice steady. "Not a dime to Daniel or Sophie. They made their choices." Ellen nodded, pulling out a legal pad. "Who gets it then?" she asked. I leaned back, picturing the peonies outside, their stubborn blooms defying neglect. "I want it to go to a charity," I said. "The Asheville Senior Care Fund, for folks who've got no family to lean on. For women like me, who've had to fight to keep what's theirs." Ellen smiled, jotting it down. "That's generous, Margaret. It'll mean something." The next morning, I drove 3 miles to the Asheville Community Church, where I met Pastor Elaine, a woman with a voice like warm honey. I handed her a draft of my new will, the pages crisp with purpose. "This house, my savings, everything, it's for seniors who need a hand," I told her. "I want it to bloom like my peonies, long after I'm gone." She took my hand, her eyes shining. "You're building a legacy, Margaret. Not just for you, but for this town." I nodded, my throat tight, not with sorrow, but with pride. Back home, I stepped into my garden, the peonies glowing under the morning sun. I knelt, pulling weeds with steady hands, the dirt cool against my skin. This was my ground, fought for and won. The house behind me stood quiet, but it wasn't silent. It whispered with the life George and I had built, the life I'd reclaimed. I wasn't done yet. There was one last step, a lesson to share with the world that had watched my fight unfold. My Asheville home, all 1,500 square feet of it, stands quiet now, its oak floors and peonies bearing witness to a battle I never thought I'd fight. The sting of Daniel's slap, Sophie's entitled smiles, the weight of their betrayal, it's all behind me, but the scars remain, etched not in my skin but in my soul. I'm Margaret, a 6-8-year-old widow who learned the hard way that love doesn't always protect you, even from those you raised. This house, built with George's hands and my heart, is more than bricks and mortar. It's a testament to resilience, to standing firm when the world expects you to crumble. I fought for it not with anger but with proof, with patience, with the quiet strength of a woman who refused to be erased. I've rewritten my story, not just for me, but for every woman who's felt invisible, every senior who's been pushed aside by those they trusted most. My home, my peonies, my legacy, they're safe now, destined for the Asheville Senior Care Fund to lift up those who, like me, have had to claw their way back from betrayal. The lesson I've learned is simple but heavy. Silence isn't surrender. It's a weapon when paired with truth. Keep your records, know your rights, and never let anyone mistake your quiet for weakness. Trust your worth, because no one else will do it for you. I documented every step, every bank withdrawal, every Instagram post, every lie, and it saved me. It can save you too. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever felt the sting of being overlooked or betrayed, I ask you to share it. Drop a comment below, tell me. Have you faced a moment where you had to stand your ground? Your voice matters, and I want to hear it. Hit that like button if you believe no one should lose their home to greed. And please, subscribe to the Unwanted Revenge. Join us for more stories of strength, where the quiet ones rise. Together, we We can remind the world that our lives, our homes, our legacies are worth fighting for. I'm Margaret, and I'm still here, tending my peonies, living my truth. Let's keep telling these stories, because they're not just mine, they're ours.